It is Friday, September 5th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back to another Silksong episode of LTPS. And as always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The September PS Plus Essential Games are now live on PSN, so add those to your library. And one really cool thing about Stardew Valley is that you're actually granted the license on PlayStation Vita. So if you do claim it on PS5, and I think you have to do it on PS5 first, or the PlayStation mobile app, you have to claim it via a modern platform first. But then if you go to Vita, it should be in your download history, and you can get that version of the game, which is more of a legacy snapshot version, so it's not nearly as updated as the one on PS5, but still really cool PSA that the game is in your Vita library as well. Anyway, moving on to our first news story, though, the Astro DualSense is back, or rather we have details for it coming back since we already knew it was coming back as a slightly different version. So this one is called the Joyful Limited Edition because the Astrobot eyes on the touchpad are just happy this time around. They're squinting upwards. So pre-orders begin September 12th on PlayStation Direct and participating retailers, and the controller comes out October 30th. So that is the restock of the Astrobot controller, technically a different variant if you're into collecting, but otherwise it will be back again. Next up, a new PlayStation 5 model is on the way very soon. We have this new report from Bill Kuhn writing for Deal Labs, where based on certification documents, a PS5 2100 series model is coming in very soon, CFI 2100, which design-wise, the console is visually the same as the existing one, but apparently in the EU, the digital edition of this model is going from 1 terabyte of SSD storage back down to 825, because that was what the launch fat consoles came with. It was bumped up to 1 terabyte standard with the Slim console, but now specifically in the EU, for the digital edition, it's going down to 825, and the pricing is the same after what was 2 price increases, because it was $399, then $449, so it will still be €499, just with less storage for the digital edition, and the release is set for September 13th, and the disk drive is coming later, the disk drive model rather. Now with any sort of new model revision, even when the console exterior-wise looks the same, it's usually internal changes. We only know about the storage thing because the retail box will show right on there what it's going to come with, right? So we know that. Internally, after we get some teardowns, I'm sure we'll see what Sony did or did not move around. I'm not sure if there's any major changes that we should be expecting to see, although in the context of the current global economy, you would think they want to try and save costs somewhere, maybe even just try to make the console a little bit lighter. So there's generally that's what we see with these model revisions, where the outside might look exactly the same. It's just a shame that this is where we are right now, where, you know, based on certain markets, certain regions, and what they're planning on doing with these consoles, and the digital edition has always been a very tough sell for Sony. It's always lost money for them, but even after 2 price increases, you're seeing them sort of value drop the machine as well to sort of protect the margins that they do or do not really have. I mean, we know why they do these things, but man, it just really sucks to see it in plain view right here. And at least for the EU, for this particular console, it sucks that that's where we are right now. Now, in other PS5 is expensive news, we also have some choice words here from Capcom's president, Haruhito Sugimoto, speaking with the Nikkei about how for Monster Hunter Wilds, they were expecting PlayStation 5 would be the main platform where they would have the bulk of their sales, and now they're revealing that that did not really meet their sales expectations, citing the PlayStation 5's high price, the cost of PS Plus, and the cost of games, getting more particular about how the total cost is a barrier for younger players. Now, mind you, Monster Hunter Wilds is Capcom's fastest selling game ever, and it's over 10 million copies sold right now, but it's the sales legs after launch that is the main concern here. The game really did sort of fall off a cliff after the initial 8-something million they got within the first week or something like that. So, you know, the game clearly did well on paper initially, but it's more about how it fell off after that, which is not unusual. It seems like a lot of big publishers are citing that problem, and that they might do well initially, but the sort of slow burn that they're expecting afterwards just is not really there, where the game will slowly accumulate up to 12, 13, 14 million in sales, and it's just not really seeing that. So it's a weird thing, right? I mean, they're not wrong. I mean, PlayStation 5 is expensive, games are expensive, Plus is expensive. When you put all those things together, they're not wrong even remotely. Now, there's still some accountability on the state of the game when it came out, and also the comparable cost to try and play the game on PC, because that's the thing about consoles. There's still, generally speaking, the lower barrier of entry for modern video games, but relative to like Switch 2's Japan price, as an example, there's a lot of upside to a platform like that versus PlayStation 5. So it's like nobody's really wrong here. They're still trying to sort of push blame somewhere else when realistically it's not. PS5 did well. The install base of the console is right where it should be at this point in its life. They sold a lot of copies. It's just, for one reason or another, the game is just not really doing what Capcom was expecting. And this is not the first time we've seen a publisher sort of place blame on PlayStation when they're not wrong, but at the same time, there does have to be some accountability on why the game is not doing as well as they were thinking long term. Let's move on to some game news here, starting off with Marvel Tokon. The closed beta invites were sent out, and a slight change has already been made for that closed beta because initially the beta terms that you agree to from PlayStation is not being able to record, share, or talk about your experience, but the Marvel Tokon Twitter account has already confirmed that they're allowing you to do that. So they want to make it pretty open. You can record, stream, do whatever you want. They have confidence in the way the game looks and is presented. So at least that's good news that they are lenient and able to acknowledge that stuff right away. So not being, super heavy-handed with striking down channels or streamers that are trying to actually talk about what is a pretty exciting project for the fighting game community. Moving on to Everybody's Golf Hot Shots, the latest entry in the Hot Shots franchise, the Everybody's Golf franchise, depending on who you ask. But the new entry since 2019, Everybody's Hot Shots VR. And it's really great to finally have the game back, although the reviews have not been super kind. Seems like there has been some performance issues on Switch and PlayStation. It doesn't look as clean, visually speaking, which for this kind of game, very bright and colorful. That's also disappointing. The core gameplay is still there. I mean, it's you would think that's hard to mess up. I haven't had any time to really play or experience the game, but it seems like that's the general consensus, which is also a shame because, Clap Hands is not the developer on this franchise anymore. They historically were working on it for most of the franchise's life, and so right now it's Hyde, developer Hyde, that worked on this particular entry, and, big surprise, all of a sudden this particular entry has some fundamental problems. So it really sucks seeing that because this is sort of the great thing about Sony licensing out these older, not niche, but you know what I mean, just not mainstream properties anymore to Bandai Namco, and then them finding a studio to go ahead and reship these games not only on PlayStation, but PC and Switch as well. But we don't want to have shoddy versions of these games coming out. It doesn't really look good, and it doesn't bode well for these IP and their viability to possibly see another sequel. Next up, we had a dedicated state of play for 007 First Light that aired this past Wednesday. It was 35-something minutes long, a very thorough gameplay deep dive, showing off a very long sequence, a few uninterrupted sequences of going into or infiltrating a hotel, seeing what that's like, and driving after some dude, and then going after, or getting into like a bunch of, shootouts and things like that. Very straightforward. I mean, I like these kind of gameplay deep dives, if only because depending on the studio, they can be very open and transparent with the state the game is in. So like right off rip, the big thing is performance in this gameplay showcase, which is totally fine. I think more and more people are becoming a lot more understanding of how games have time to polish and they can look very rough right up to release. Oftentimes that's why we don't see trailers nearly as often anymore. It was usually a huge resource hog for a lot of studios to show up to a trade show every year or sometimes every quarter. You're talking about your E3, Gamescom, TGS, Paris Games Week, things like that. It's always a huge pain for some studios to get trailers up and running when you have to create a semi-polished vertical slice and they're still trying to make the damn game, you know what I mean? So this gameplay deep dive, it was nice to see, very thorough. I don't care for the IP, so I mean, it is a very cool sort of mix of Splinter Cell, Hitman, and, if you like the Bond property, then I think there's a lot here to enjoy. It looks engaging, looks fun. I just don't care for the IP, but it was a strong showing, I'll say that. I also wish we got more gameplay deep dives like this for State of Plays. It's definitely a great outlet for this kind of stuff to happen. I just wish we got more of it. In other State of Play news, we have a big rumor here, which is Marvel's Wolverine might be shown off very soon. So this report comes from Tom Henderson, writing for Insider Gaming, where sources say production of the next trailer is done for this game, and it's planned for the next State of Play towards the end of September. And if it does not show up there, then the Game Awards would be the next likely event. But the report does say the trailer is complete, and it's planned for the next State of Play the end of this September, which this is not the first time we've heard of the next State of Play being the end of September. But without any rumors, it's always important to remember that Sony has historically for this generation really liked September for either showcases or State of Play, so it's a fairly safe bet that we will get another live stream. Now, in the same report, Insider Gaming also says that they have it on good authority that the next mainline God of War is in the works right now as well, which that is also not really big news. I think it kind of went without saying that Santa Monica did have the next God of War in the pipeline at some point. The major news for Santa Monica is always a matter of, can they maintain mainline God of War games next to this, not a new IP, but feels like one project that's been going on in the oven for a little bit as well. So I'm still more curious about that, even though it's always exciting to me to have more God of War, which I think is also something you can always depend on for Santa Monica and PlayStation to do something with God of War alongside this 2.5D Metroidvania thing, which who knows when they'll be ready to show that off, but there's a potential that we could see that fairly soon. Anyway, what we said about State of Plays recently, it's the same thing. There's a lot of things that they can talk about. I think Marvel's Wolverine was definitely the most likely candidate to finally have its sort of re-reveal, really formal reveal, because the first time we saw it, it was a CG trailer, and you've seen this thing over and over and over again, which I'm showing to you again because that's all we have of this game outside of very early Breach gameplay from the Insomniac Breach, I should mention, which I've never been able to display, and that's not really fair to display. But it will be really cool to see the game on Insomniac's terms, and I would think that the next State of Play is where it is going to happen, which means the TGAs might also have something as well. It would actually be more disappointing to not have it at the State of Play, because then okay, that's probably going to be their TGA thing. So give me something at the State of Play and give me something at the TGAs. I am ready to see this game. Next up, Helldivers 2 on Xbox has been doing very, very well based on some preliminary data coming in from Alinea Analytics, the game research firm, where they are estimating that Helldivers 2 has sold roughly 926,000 copies on Xbox after just 6 days. And it is currently a top-selling game on the Xbox storefront, and total sales have now likely reached 18 million with the recent Xbox launch. We actually had Arrowhead CEO report a 500,000 player count, which we can see the Steam CCU at the time was around 160,000, so that's a solid 340,000 that were on console during the launch week, and a good portion was likely on Xbox. The news here, of course, is that this is the kind of game that is a premium paid title, and it was able to penetrate an audience that, has been conditioned for a number of years now to not pay for games. And so far, it is paying off. That was the entire point of PlayStation willingly shipping the game on Xbox and publishing it there as well. So you can see that small little green blip on the graph there, which that's the whole point. Why would Sony say no to an additional 10-15% of revenue for this game, bolster the player base a little bit, and allow the game to be fostered into a bigger cultural icon? That's the thing about Helldivers 2, right? Is that the game has sort of breaking past that mold. They want it to be this very big, grand thing where eventually you see TV and movie adaptations and people are cosplaying at game conventions, and it becomes something so much bigger, and PlayStation and Arrowhead have found it with Helldivers 2. So I can't say I'm even remotely shocked at about 1 million sales on Xbox, especially for what is a smaller install base too, right? Like, they were definitely able to penetrate that audience in a meaningful way, and in the context of this particular game, it made sense. Does that mean they'll go off and do other games? I still find that's highly unlikely, and it's still like a really weird spot when the next Xbox may just have a Windows, software layer that allows Steam to be installed, and then you can launch any PS Studio game that you want. So in theory, it's like Sony has to ship games in the here and now to make a few million in revenue per PS Studio game in the here and now before that next Xbox. But I just find that to be unlikely. It's a weird thing to sort of think about, but Helldivers 2, I think, absolutely made sense before that next Xbox showed up. Now, on the flip side of this conversation, the prisoner exchange was that we also got Gears of War Reloaded on PlayStation, and so recently the Gears of War Twitter account did confirm 1 million players, ending the console war is how they phrased it in the in the tweet, which is definitely humorous, but that number likely includes the free upgrades that people were getting on Xbox and PC if they had the previous Ultimate Edition, and then of course Game Pass players as well, which when you include those things alone, 1 million sounds very unimpressive to me. 1 million players, like the metric that is not including or rather the number is not strictly sold copies. I saw that and I'm like, that doesn't sound remotely good. When you're talking about Game Pass players that can jump in and then the free upgrades, like that seems like a very soft number, even though on paper you would think a lot of the paid sales are going to be heavily leaning on the PlayStation side of things. But I would have thought I don't know, I saw that number and I'm like, that doesn't really seem that high to me. that high to me. The player metric is always, I don't want to say misleading, but it can be when they phrase it that way and you overlook how people can access the game. In other Arrowhead and Helldivers news, we had some very interesting words from the Arrowhead CEO, Shams Jorjani, speaking with a number of people on the Discord community, and just explaining how the way they approach player feedback, they have to be careful about listening to the words that are being said by people on Reddit or streamers or big name streamers that are voicing concerns and providing that feedback. And they just were trying to explain that that's not really an ideal way to analyze and respond to feedback, explaining that the vast majority of people playing are playing the game silently. So they look at player stats and use different tools to calibrate the game from there. And I think it would go without saying, but that is how the vast majority of studios do operate, because you kind of have to operate that way. Sometimes those things align in the sense that a big thing is happening within the game, maybe a major change, right? The way they price something, the way that a game or a gun is nerfed, or the way that something's buffed. Whatever the situation is, it might be so extreme to where obviously you have people yelling on YouTube and Twitch and Reddit, and you've got the community voicing the concerns in a very vocal manner, but that also does specifically align with in-game metrics that they can see that is not public to the wider audience. Sometimes that's very clearly what's going on, but other times it might be a smaller issue that you would think is something they should be addressing, but they might have some in-game telemetry that says what they're doing is not really a problem. And so always something to consider. I like when a lot of game CEOs, anybody at a company, any sort of senior ranking position, they're able to, be very forthcoming about those things and let people know, yeah, we understand, but at the same time, we have to follow what works, and we have the in-game data. It might not always be right as far as how we choose to use that data, but oftentimes that is the way that we should approach it and tread carefully on just following the sort of hive mind, tunnel vision mentality of appeasing the few that like to talk online. Moving on to the PlayStation Studios developer Haven Studios and their game Fairgame, and we have some not so good news. Recently spotted on LinkedIn, the game's director, Daniel Drapeau, has left Haven Studio after 4.5 years. They've recently joined WB Games Montreal as a creative director, but they were at Haven from the very beginning. So now we have Jay Raymond leaving, the game director leaving, and this was after the report of, internal testing, mock reviews of the game not panning out all that well, that it's in rough shape, not really fun, the gameplay loop just doesn't really work. Whatever the case is, clearly where they're at right now is not working, and so the question becomes, unsurprisingly, will this game see the light of day or will it get canceled? I mean, it's looking more and more clear that that's probably the path that's going down, and I think in this current economic environment, I hate to say it, and I really don't want to see this happen. I don't want to see a studio close down. I don't want to see games get canceled. But gosh, you have to wonder, when will we get that news, waking up tomorrow to see it, maybe before the quarter ends out, because that's something that, Sony will definitely try and do to improve the balance sheet. But, I think that is probably the more likely path here outside of this game getting canceled and Haven getting another chance, because that's the other weird part about this, right? Haven's a new studio, and they're unproven. Initially when they were established, we were hearing that Mark Cerny was working close with this team, and they were building tools that could help studios build and develop games in the cloud. I don't know where the status of all that is, or if that gives them some sort of, not protection, but, if that sort of justifies the studio existing in the here and now, even though they're struggling on shipping their first game. Like, I don't know, right? But we heard about that initially when the studio was being established in the middle of COVID. That was the sort of novelty of Haven and them trying to work through COVID. It's just now we're on the other side of that, and they've not shipped a game, and we see leadership leaving. It's not looking good. And I think at this point, Fairgames is absolutely in trouble from the amount of live service guardrails that Sony's putting up to better navigate the live service space. Next up, the China Hero Project game Lost Soul Aside has been out for a week, which means we finally have some reviews and also community feedback. And yeah, something about this game, I was nervous, and I'm like, yeah, I can see what is playing out. So yeah, the game's like very mid from what we're hearing. Right now it's sitting at a 62 on Metacritic across 23 different reviews. The combat system does seem pretty responsive. The game is visually very flashy. We could always see that from the trailers. It just seems like the story falls really flat, and the English voice acting really leaves a lot to be desired. There's been some really humorous clips shared online, which it's, I don't know what it is about me, but I see stuff like that and I think, man, that makes me want to play it more than if it reviewed in like the 80s or something. Like, it was just a really good sound, technically great playing game. Like, I'll play those all day, every day, but there's always like a novelty to a sort of 6 out of 10 kind of game where you probably would consider it bad or mediocre. It really depends on your own definition, but oftentimes when a game doesn't fully come together quite like that, that makes me want to play it more than the really, really good stuff. But it sucks to see that Lost Soul Aside does have its fair share of issues, even though it does still seem like it has some redeeming qualities to it. Moving on to Shift Up and Stellar Blade, we have some very broad words here from the Shift Up CEO during their semi-annual report. This was translated by Genki_JPN on Twitter. Based on Shift Up's statement, they were talking about the sequel for this game and how they're actively pursuing the franchise development of the IP and working on a sequel. And they do mention that the sequel featured the same action from the first game, but try to incorporate an expanded worldview, universe, world building, things like that. That's what they're saying about this game, which that's really all they did say, so there's not much else to really talk about here. I'm not really sure why this made as many headlines as it did. I guess the game is just, that popular, so it's interesting to hear. I think what's noteworthy is that that's the whole point of a sequel, is building upon what was established with the first game, and with them having assets and having this game off the ground, you just hope that conceivably the sequel will come a little bit faster and the turnaround will be not nearly as long as getting the first entry off the ground. And the game did do very well, so I am looking forward to finally finishing my first playthrough of the game, which I can admit, not far. I'm getting a lot of business for my 7 Rebirth playthrough, DS2, Yote coming up soon. Then there's Luminous Arise and Katamari and Silent Hill F and a lot of Nintendo stuff coming out with Pokemon. I'm very overwhelmed. There's a lot of things I would love to play. Stellar Blade is on there, do not get me wrong, but I would love to eventually finish that. And this inevitable sequel, which at my own pace, good lord, I could probably play this game and the sequel back to back. Next up, Kojima Productions is doing a new event live stream on September 23rd called Beyond the Strand, which will go into some future projects. So there's really not much that we can say outside of this event featuring special guests and, again, a glimpse into future projects, which right now that's just OD with Microsoft and then Phison with PlayStation. And we just heard from Kojima that he is the only person working on that game. There is likely nothing to show for it, which even in that case, like sometimes Kojima loves sending out a very early teaser for a game that is like 4 or 5 years out. So, I mean, I think it's reasonable to think that like, oh, Phison, we could see that game sooner than one would think, but it's, I think, really soon to see that game. So it's probably OD, or at the very least other sort of, it says Beyond the Strand for the name event, so that likely means not Death Stranding stuff, but, there is the Death Stranding adaptation, so perhaps we could see that alongside OD. With OD, at least, I mean, we know Microsoft has had their big U-turn ever since they announced OD, so it's like, conceivably that game is going to come to PlayStation 5, maybe not initially, but it would be cool to know that you can watch this and see anything about OD and know the game is probably going to be shipping on PlayStation at some point. Next up, Hollow Knight Silksong is finally available, and this game has been on everybody's radar for so long. There's been so much hype building up to it that when it finally came out, it was a problem for every storefront the game shipped on. So I guess on PC and the eShop, a lot of errors. They were really buckling, and you could have got a transaction through, but for the most part, that was really problematic. And then you just straight up could not check out on Xbox, and then the game did not even show up on PSN when it was supposed to. So the page was down, the wishlist was down. It didn't go back up until 30 minutes to an hour after, but that was only the wishlist page. And then the game finally went live on PSN after 2 hours. And I'm not sure if it was related, but PSN was having issues hours after that where people could log in, but your friends list was not showing up during game base or anything. I tried to check it out myself, but everything was working for me by the time I turned on my console. So not sure what's going on there, but you would think that's probably related. Usually, I mean, that can happen. Network traffic can get that high on PSN. I don't want to say I'm shocked, but I'm a little surprised that Hollow Knight was able to do that when other really big AAA releases that do ship millions of copies on day one are not able to do quite that. So it's interesting, but it's also cool to see. I'm very happy for Team Sherry. And the other thing too is that they announced, and it's already confirmed, the game's out, but $20 price tag, which I think a lot of folks were very much expecting $25, $30. They probably could have charged even more, but it just shows that that was a very pragmatic and consumer-friendly decision to keep the game very affordable to the point where that's going to please the fans that were absolutely going to buy the game, and maybe even some that were, on the fence, but here in 20, it's a much easier buy when so many games within the same scope and size are typically selling for $25, $30 nowadays, which is great to see. The only weird thing is that obviously it was a fantastic decision. It just sucks for other studios that still want to charge $25, $30, and their game might not be as good or seen as successful as Hollow Knight. It's kind of a weird thing where both of those can be true, and that it's great news that Hollow Knight is 20, but also it sucks for a smaller studio, the same size, same scope, same budget. They might need a little bit more. They can't quite do Hollow Knight numbers, so they want to charge $25, $30, but they're going to be seen and propped up rather as making a decision that looks bad in light of Hollow Knight. Both those things can be true, and I just think it's a slight rock and a hard place for other studios that have to be mindful of that pricing for Hollow Knight. Next up, Marvel Rivals has been confirmed for PlayStation 4. This version will come out on September 12th with the new season. We did hear that this was going to happen ahead of time, and we talked about this a little bit on our Tuesday video about, PS4 still getting games 12 years onward, but it is still pretty weird and nutty to see. We actually also had a separate story from Dusk Golem, I believe, how Resident Evil Requiem is going to have a PS4 version as well. And that's alongside Call of Duty having a PS4 version, so just as far as me not mentioning those games on the Tuesday conversation, because don't get me wrong, I mean, there's been some good rebuttals to that conversation. The whole point I was making is that historically 12, 13, 14 years onward, Sony will still allow game submissions on PlayStation platforms, so in the here and now, there's nothing that unusual about PS4 still getting games. The weird thing is that when I went to find footage of PS4 announcements, you actually had to go out of your way to find them. A lot of studios have indeed stopped shipping games on PlayStation 4. So always some valid talks and arguments being made in the comments. Don't get me wrong. I totally see where some people are coming from as far as how it feels weird and different for PS4 to still get some major releases Marvel Rivals or Black Ops or Resident Evil, for example. So, those games definitely those franchises, those very big games, you weren't really seeing those into the 12 years onward from PlayStation 3 or even the PlayStation 2 days. It was primarily sports games or smaller titles, rather. So again, good arguments. I get it. That's why I said towards the end of that conversation was, I do believe that PS4 will be in a much healthier spot when it gets to year 13 and 14, when it's 2027 and we still might see these things happen, then that's where it makes a lot more sense in my view as far as man, it's crazy how relevant it is. But, in the here and now, I still find it's a little bit too soon, but I totally get where some people are coming from. With that in mind, though, Marvel Rivals, PS4, I am very curious to see how that game will run, because that is the weird thing about Rivals, is that it really buckles on current generation machines, so who knows what kind of state PS4 is going to be in. Moving on to the now canceled Perfect Dark reboot from The Initiative and Crystal Dynamics. It turns out that game was almost saved by Take-Two. So recently we got a report from Jason Schreier writing for Bloomberg where publisher Take-Two was in negotiations to rescue the game essentially until IP ownership conflicts came up and then the deal fell apart. So Crystal Dynamics, as we all know, was put on the game years ago to help work on it, and it was them, owned by Embracer, that took the game to Take-Two in an effort to save it. And so I guess Take-Two was speaking with Microsoft, Crystal Dynamics, Embracer, and it was just a lot of conflict as far as who would retain the IP rights for Perfect Dark, which I would think was more particular for that particular game, I should say, not the IP itself, unless Take-Two wanted to straight up buy the IP from Microsoft. But that's the weird thing about, trying to reboot a game and having somebody else come in to finance it. Almost always the one financing wants the IP. That's why I always think it's kind of crazy where PlayStation is nowadays when they do programs like the China Hero or India Hero project, Mina Hero, or when they collaborate with games day one on PlayStation Plus. I mean, these are a lot of, negotiations and deals that if they were to do them in the PS3 days where they choose to publish them, almost always they want to publish and they want to own the IP. That's how Sony has built up a library of hundreds of old IP at this point, right? Because that's how the deals were always structured, and now it's way more open. But sometimes you do get these stories of something like this, where with Perfect Dark, I would think that if Take-Two wanted to, get the game over the finish line, their stipulation was, well, you better give us the IP, and Microsoft was like, no way, we'll let it stay dead. Moving on to Rayman, the franchise that's been quiet for a number of years now, and also the Twitter account as well, but it recently was brought back online with the announcement of the 30th anniversary, where they're trying to celebrate it with concept art reveals, developer interviews, monthly giveaways, and more things like that. And the brand producer said in a video that they're working with Ubisoft Milan on the future of Rayman, which he did caution not to expect news soon, but that it is in good hands. Which, if you recall, Insider Gaming had a story last year about how the Rayman remake was in development, targeting a late 2026 release with these studios, and it's also understood that there's a preliminary plan in place to make Rayman 4, depending on how the remake does. So Rayman is always one of those classic, 30-year-old IPs now at this point that's had a number of entries. It's a really fun 2D side-scroller. It's always very charismatic and iconic looking. I think Rayman's the kind of, character that you can prop up next to a Mario, Zelda, Crash Bandicoot, Sackboy, a number of iconic 3D platformers. Rayman is undeniably in there. So I would love to see more Rayman for sure. I don't play a lot of those games though, I'll admit. I mean, there's been a ton that I've completely missed out on. But hey, you know me, if we're talking about really old iconic video game characters, absolutely finance them. Let's get them back out there and see how they do, until they inevitably don't do nearly as well as I would hope, and it breaks my heart, but I hope that's not the case for this one. Next up, this story kind of went under the radar, but it was reported on by Stephen Totilo writing for his newsletter GameFile, where it was about Sony winning a lawsuit against 35 online stores operating on Amazon for selling counterfeit PlayStation goods, or at least what seemed like very misleading PlayStation branded, licensed goods. So they were operating on Amazon and found liable for violating PlayStation copyrights and trademarks. So Sony filed the suit in April, alleging these shops were selling counterfeit products from China, and none of the accused tried to defend themselves, so Sony won the default judgment, and the stores were found liable for $500,000 in damages. And the only noteworthy thing here is that I thought they filed this suit because I remember seeing something about this in January of this year, I think. But either way, I mean, they're a big organization. They probably file this stuff all the time, and, very rarely do we, hear about it, even though the stuff's all filed very publicly. In this case, though, I will say, Amazon is a place you got to be super careful about. But I guess nowadays, everywhere. I know Best Buy opened up third-party sellers. Walmart's had third-party sellers for a long time now. But you always got to be very careful what is basically arbitrage or private label sellers where they buy things in bulk from Alibaba or something and try to pass it off as what seems to be licensed PlayStation goods, or really any product you try and buy. Always be very careful of that stuff when you are looking on those websites, because almost always you can buy the things a lot cheaper, but also it's usually crap, like the really bad products. Like that's why whenever I did those accessory videos where I was looking at, just terrible accessories from Amazon or eBay, and I'm way overpaying because it's basically the private label stuff I just told you about, almost always in those videos, I did not recommend anything. I always just clowned on them for 20 something minutes, just looking at all this useless crap and like putting it on my PlayStation. And I'm like, why do people buy this stuff? I don't know. That's how I've always felt about that stuff, but just be careful out there when you're spending your money. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry. And I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was looking at PlayStation 4 and trying to answer the question of why is it still getting games, what's going on, so we had to talk about that. Also, a very brief announcement here, but coming up on September 27th from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., my buddy Rob, his video game store Retro Rehome in Mount Morris, New York, he's doing a trade night. So from 7 to 10 on a Saturday, we'll just be hanging out. People are going to be setting up some tables. He's got kind of a small store, but he said it's always like a madhouse there. A lot of people show up and they're just, trading goods, hanging out, talking about games, trying to buy stuff, sell stuff, make some deals, and I'll be there. I'll be hanging out and just chit-chatting with the community, so if you want to come out, then by all means, absolutely do it. That is September 27th, 7 to 10 p.m. If you're in the area, it's definitely a cool place to come out to. We've been to that store a few times in videos, but I've been to Rob's a lot now at this point. You're only recently seeing it in videos, but Rob's a good friend, and that's his second annual trade night, so it'll be really cool going out and just chilling. So if you're in the area, come through. Otherwise, though, that is it. Actually, I do want to mention no Click R3 this week. We should have one, but just timing, it did not really work out. I know Game and Talk had to, I guess, use the streaming service that we use, and I was just really busy, so we're just going to try and push that into next week, so that's what's going on there. But otherwise, that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.